In the early 1940s, World War II was raging across Europe, but in Asia and the Pacific, Japan had been expanding aggressively. Japan had taken over parts of China, Southeast Asia, and many Pacific islands. They wanted to create a large empire and gain resources like oil, rubber, and metals to support their economy and military. The United States, which opposed Japan's expansion, had placed economic sanctions on Japan. This created tension between the two countries. In response, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, on December 7, 1941, hoping to cripple the U.S. Navy and keep America from interfering in the Pacific. This attack brought the United States into World War II. After Pearl Harbor, Japan continued its campaign of conquest, quickly taking over territories in the Pacific. They wanted to keep the U.S. Navy weak, so they could maintain control over the islands they had captured. Japan's military leaders knew that the U.S. would try to rebuild and strike back, so they planned another bold attack, hoping to eliminate any remaining threat from the American Navy. Japan's next target was Midway Atoll, a small but strategically important island about halfway between Asia and North America. By capturing Midway, Japan hoped to draw the U.S. Pacific Fleet into a trap. Japanese Admiral Yamamoto, who had planned the Pearl Harbor attack, thought that if the U.S. fleet came to defend Midway, Japan could destroy their remaining aircraft carriers and gain full control of the Pacific. To catch the Americans off guard, the Japanese Navy used a complex plan, sending a fleet of aircraft carriers and warships to Midway, with more ships positioned to attack any American reinforcements that arrived. However, the Japanese plan had a major flaw. They didn't realize that American codebreakers had cracked parts of their secret communications. U.S. intelligence intercepted Japanese messages and found out about the attack on Midway. American Admiral Chester Nimitz, who was in charge of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, now knew Japan's exact plan and timing. With this valuable information, Admiral Nimitz prepared a counter-strategy. He positioned 3 American aircraft carriers, USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and USS Yorktown, in a hidden location near Midway. The Americans waited for the Japanese fleet to arrive, planning to ambush them. On June 4, 1942, Japanese planes launched an attack on Midway Island, bombing the U.S. base there. While this was happening, the American carriers moved into position. Japanese forces were focused on their attack on Midway and did not realize the U.S. carriers were nearby. As the Japanese prepared their planes for a second wave of attacks on Midway, the American carriers launched their own planes. Dive bombers and torpedo planes from the U.S. fleet targeted the Japanese carriers. In a dramatic twist, American dive bombers arrived at the Japanese carriers just as they were refueling and rearming their planes. This timing was critical. Having bombs and fuel on the decks made the Japanese carriers highly vulnerable. In a matter of minutes, American dive bombers scored direct hits on 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. These carriers burst into flames and were soon out of action. The remaining Japanese carrier, Hiryu, launched a counterattack and managed to damage the USS Yorktown, which was later sunk by a Japanese submarine. However, American planes quickly found Hiryu and destroyed it as well, leaving Japan with no carriers left in the battle. By the end of the battle, the U.S. had sunk all 4 of Japan's carriers, dealing a massive blow to the Japanese Navy. The Americans lost only 1 carrier, USS Yorktown, but they still had 2 carriers in operation, while Japan's carrier fleet was crippled. The Battle of Midway was a turning point in the Pacific War. Japan had lost experienced pilots and valuable ships that they couldn't easily replace. This defeat stopped Japan's expansion and put the U.S. on the offensive, beginning a series of battles that would eventually push Japanese forces back across the Pacific. In summary, Midway wasn't just a battle. It was a carefully planned trap by the U.S. and a huge strategic victory that shifted the balance of power in the Pacific. By cracking Japan's codes, setting an ambush, and acting with precision, the U.S. changed the course of the war in the Pacific.